Anyone following my content in the winter 2023 anime season knows that I was really hot on Handyman Saitou when it first started airing. And for a lot of people, they'll note that at some point I stopped talking about it. And there's a really good reason for that. I mean, granted, this isn't a new thing. What we're really getting into here is the tonal shift aspect. I've covered shows like Punchline at some point where it started off really funny and ecchi and then at some point gets really serious. We had here recently Love Flops. That was a show that was all about ecchi comedy that turned serious. It's not a new thing, but I will admit that with Handyman Saitou specifically, it pulls it off in some ways and not others. Handyman Saitou, like I said, was a fantastic show when it first started off. The only real issue that I had with the series was around the aspect of it was too skip-based. You had a very large cast of characters, and each little segment of each episode was covering each character, and so it was jumping around a lot because it had a lot of characters to cover. But at some point, they unlock this one section in the labyrinth. And that's the point in which it really does feel like all the characters funnel to the same exact location, which makes perfect sense. This area has this new big labyrinth open up. Of course, all these characters spread around this kingdom are going to come together. And it was sad because I got what I wanted. I had the story really shift to being more focused on a group and not jumping around a lot. But there was the side effect that came with that, and that's that the tonal shift happened. And I won't claim necessarily that I didn't like that tonal shift. I can't necessarily say that I don't like where it went with this tonal shift. It's just more of the fact that I realized very quickly the show lost its greatest selling point. The show for me early on was that comedy. The comedy writing was absolutely fantastic. And it was almost if the writer decided, you know, look, I'm going to try to tell a story here, and so I need to get a little serious here. And I appreciate the fact that the writer wasn't willing to shake up that writing and really ruin the mood of a serious story by throwing in comedy. But the thing that I came to an ultimate conclusion with, at least with this particular story arc, is that I appreciated the comedy writing more than their serious writing. Of course, the main focus here with this main story beat is Morlock and Saitou. It's really the two of them. Getting into the backstory of Morlock himself, the loss of his daughter because he kind of neglected her, she got sick and then she died, and that regret that it instilled upon him because he was so focused on his research that he let her die. And he's trying to undo that by essentially trying to bring her back to life. And yes, he finds this information, he ends up trying to use it, and it summons Saitou from another world. And I really like that story. I think Morlock's story was fine, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I really like Morlock. He is a, sorry to say it, he's a relatable character in the regard that I've seen that. I've seen that mindset of somebody that you just have around you that just keeps on forgetting what you've kind of tried to tell them. They're constantly lost in their own thought, and they keep losing their memories and their balance, a dementia state, basically. But he was still endearing in that regard. He was still lovable, and you wanted to support him, and I loved how much Saitou supported him. So getting into his backstory was fine with me. It was not a deep story. This is, again, an idea of neglecting for studies and losing what's actually important, and then trying to redeem that. The unfortunate thing is that, while that was tragic in its own regard, the other story they got into, obviously, was the assassin. And that's where, unfortunately for me, it didn't really work. The assassin story was just a little bit too simple for me. I understood the frustration there, and I like the idea of the redemption story with the assassin, but it wasn't enough to really carry the amount of episodes they went through in order to cover that. And so that's where I get into my ultimate question in this video is, was it really worth it? In the end, was Handyman Saitou as a show moving away from what made it so great, the comedy, going into this story, was it worth it? Was the trade-off worth it? And my ultimate decision is no. I think this was easily its weakest arc, despite the fact of how much I liked Morlock's story and how it ties in Saitou. Everything around Saitou and his party is sort of thrown in here as a storytelling beat within the assassin story, but the assassin story itself, it felt like a waste. And in the end, when I'm thinking about like my favorites of the season, it was up there. Like it was literally up there as a third. And I was looking at the list of shows here recently, and I realized, wow, Handyman Saitou dropped a lot for me. Like, compared to all these other shows, it just dropped, and it was a solid brick in the 3rd place for me. And that's not to say that there's not enough here to really discuss. I really have enjoyed the last few episodes, even still. Like I said, getting into Morlock, getting into Saitou and why he's there. I even had this ongoing theory about, isn't Railza technically Morlock's daughter? That was the big thing that kept sticking to me, because what happened when Railza dueled the monk? She said, "My name is Railza Morlock." Like, she barely whispered Morlock, and Morlock's like, "Hey, why are you whispering that part?" It sort of implies that Railza is related to Morlock in some way. Now, yes, we do know that that's not Morlock's real name. His name was Crom or something like that. But it still implies that Railza is taking upon herself the name of Morlock, which implies that Railza is somehow related to Morlock. Unless Morlock has, I don't know, a brother or siblings and stuff, and so Railza is like a niece or something, or a great niece, it still kind of implies that there's a relationship there. And technically, yes, they sort of have the same color hair. And it may explain why she has a scar on her face. They haven't really got yet into the scar, I don't believe, unless I'm forgetting. We do know that she wanted to get rid of it, and she's been going through the process of trying to get rid of it, and that was what the whole potion was that she ends up giving to Saitou. But it seems like there's way too much emphasis put on that that's her. Now, my initial thought was that he was actually successful. Whatever Morlock did to revive her was successful. It's just Saitou being brought back was a side thing to it. But it kind of here recently completely clarified that, in the fact that Morlock at some point, when he finally did use the spell, Railza was already with him. And that's why he dropped on Railza and she freaked out and nearly killed him, and Morlock charged in and said, "Wait, stop, stop, stop." So I don't know, it's one of those things where I wonder somewhat if Morlock's inability to remember things, maybe he tried it already once and it was successful. He just forgot, because again, he has this curse that makes him keep forgetting things. He might have done it and succeeded and then forgot. Maybe she doesn't want to tell him, or she's told him before, but he keeps forgetting, so she's tired of saying it. It would also sort of explain her age difference there as well, that he would have revived her at some point later, and thus she's younger than she really should be. I will admit that, like, to my earlier point about this kind of shift in the tone and stuff like that, it's like whenever it did have a funny moment, it really just kind of punched me out of nowhere. I'm going, oh my gosh, I forgot how funny this show is. Like the whole thing with when Morlock comes back and he's got his old arm has been removed because he's pretty much sacrificed his body in order to not kill them. And he wants to go put it back on, and he goes to Ninia and says, "Well, I heard that you have to use saliva in order to heal quicker, so why don't you lick it," or something like that. And then it's like, it sort of implies that it's actually true. I think when Ninia said that, she said it was a lie or something like that, but it seemed like Monpui was all about doing it as well. But it was more funny in the idea that she did this in order to be able to lick Frenlil. And then now it's backfiring on her, because now Morlock's like, well, you do this, right? So do this. And then everything around Gibble. I think Gibble is so great. I think that earlier, and I don't even know if I covered it in a video or not, the whole earlier segment of Gibble and how the idea that when Saitou first kind of met them, Liliza's doing the typical like, oh my gosh, he's so perfect for Gibble. I kind of knew that was, I had a feeling that was the direction it was going, because it was so drawn out. Like, I thought there was going to be some sort of punchline. Like, it wasn't going to be Liliza is into Saitou. Either way, in the end, like I said, for the assassin story, like I said, I felt it was just kind of shrug. Like, overall, that story was very shrug. I did like Primus and her story, and the idea that she tried to be a chunky fairy in order for the humans to not do terrible things to her, which I thought was super heartbreaking. Again, that's that we're not just tonal shifting here, we're just going deep into the realms of unsettling. And that whole aspect, her sacrifice, all that stuff was really great. But like I said, in the end, like, besides maybe the last punchline of that story, which was like the demon guys coming back just to kind of act like they were thugs just to get him to go back, was really, really cool. But again, in the end, it only really felt like it served the purpose of telling Morlock and Saitou's story. And other than that, it was just a sacrifice of what made, I think, overall, what Handyman Saitou so fantastic for. It's adventure comedy. And that's what I love about it. So it makes me hope that now that the story with the assassin's done, they'll get back into that. Now, obviously, the big question mark right now, massive spoilers if you're just kind of getting an idea of the story from me and whatnot. Massive spoilers here for the end of the recent episode, which I think was 8. Morlock passing away. What? That was kind of a crazy punchline. They leave for a while and they come back and Morlock's dead. I'm curious if they're going to actually stick with that. It wouldn't surprise me if they will stick to it. Morlock's story is done. Like, they told his backstory, they told what happened, they told how he brought Saitou, and let's be perfectly honest, we've pretty much established that Saitou doesn't want to go back. It was kind of, I really did get, I loved the whole scene with Raelza running away, that she's upset because she doesn't want to lose Saitou. Saitou means so much to her, but it came to that punchline of Raelza wants Saitou to be around. She won't say that I love you. I was waiting for it to happen. Even in the midst of her breaking this big old bug, she doesn't want Saitou to go. And he wants to be somewhere where somebody appreciates him. Raelza appreciates him, so he wants to support her. They literally just confessed marriage right there. In the typical anime fashion, they confessed marriage to each other. As much as you get in any anime. So I don't see Saitou leaving. Yes, he says that he has family, but he hasn't seen him in years, and he's wanted here, he wasn't wanted there. Saitou has no reason to leave. Raelza gave him the option, was kind of still trying to push him, which is kind of interesting. It almost felt like Raelza would be willing to say, selfishly, which is fine, I don't want you to leave. Don't leave. But yet she still sort of nudged Morlock to the idea of sending him back. But it still comes down to the problem of Morlock didn't want to because he could have been in danger. Truck-kun was still waiting for him, which doesn't make any sense, but we'll put that aside. Morlock's story's done. Morlock's use in the story is done. Yes, he can still be the one that sent him back, but he didn't want to. So what would be the point in keeping Morlock around, other than the comedy around him being a part of the party? And like I said before, I love him and I don't want him to go away, but his story is done. So I can see them kind of moving on from Morlock. So I can see this not being a fake out. I hope it's not a fake out because I really don't like these types of fake outs. But again, I can see this being it. The only way that I can see them sort of explaining it as a fake out is the idea that, oh, that guy, he's out looking at a gravestone and he just put his hat down on his daughter to kind of signify that he's given up on the whole task. Or maybe he's finally remembered her, went to the graves and put his hat down again. But we'll see next week. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts right now on Handyman Saitou, as we're pretty much coming up to the final arc of it, I would assume. Hopefully we get some re-injection of a lot of comedy, because again, I think that's where the bread and butter of this series is. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure to hit that like button down below, comment, let me know what you think of this series. Do you like the tonal shift? Do you like where it's going? Do you like it more now than it was when it was comedy? I think that's a really good question mark there. Additionally, if you're new to this channel, make sure that subscribe button so you get all my content. I did news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support the channel more, we have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, and a membership button down below. Greatly appreciate what it does, and y'all take care.